Well, Oklahoma Senator James Lankford joins us from the Russell Rotunda to tell us more about the road ahead. And Senator, let me ask you this. Is there any possibility of some bipartisan support for any of the legislation, or is they out here to jam it down your throat?
Currently, they're trying to be able to just ram everything down our throat on it. Yes, there's absolutely places where we have bipartisan cooperation. Not everything is a partisan issue in Washington, D.C., nor across America. There are a lot of areas where we have common ground to be able to work on things together, but they seem to be just intent on trying to ram the most far-left policies through and to be able to find a way to be able to destroy the Senate. And when you talk about destroying the filibuster, you're really talking about destroying what the Senate has been for 200-plus years, because they have an agenda to be able to change America into their image rather than to be able to function under who America is.
Well, you're looking at two senators, Manchin and Systema, that have got the hold. I mean, is there a possibility that they'll do away with the filibuster? Can it happen that you can see now?
It could happen here. They really need 51 votes to be able to do away with the filibuster. The filibuster is set up to make sure the minority voices always have a voice in America, and it's unique to the Senate. The House is a simple majority vote. Of course, the White House, everyone in the agencies do what the president asks them to do. In the Supreme Court, it's a majority vote. But in the Senate, both sides have to be able to have some cooperation together. You have to get 3/5 of the Senate, which is 60 votes, to be able to start debate on an issue or to be able to stop debate on an issue. That forces the bipartisan cooperation to make sure everyone in America is heard. Democrats will talk publicly about they want minority voices to be heard, but in the Senate, they're literally working to be able to stop the minority in the Senate from ever being heard. So the goal of this is a place that slows things down in the Senate, so we talk about it to make sure that we're dealing with the common ground issues that really define America.
You were down at the border recently. It looks like there's a narrative that there was no problem and it's not really a big problem. Now, is it really the crisis that we hear about?
It is a crisis, Pat. It's significant. I was in Arizona a week and a half ago to be able to look at the wall construction there of that whole system. As you know, President Biden, the first day he was in office, stopped wall construction that day and said no more can happen. Well, I got down to Arizona to see what does that look like. Literally, the fence is up for miles and miles and miles and miles, but all that's incomplete are the gates, these maintenance gates, so they can go on either side of the fencing to be able to maintain it. So you have these large openings that have not been put up. All the steel is there. So all it would take is a few days to be able to finish it, and President Biden stopped that. He also stopped the installation of the technology, cameras, lights, ground sensing technology, all of those things he stopped and said, we don't want to install those things anymore. Literally, we've already paid for it. All the materials are there. It's ready to go. But he stopped it. There's only one reason to be able to leave a fence up, but leave the gates open or to not install the technology. It's because he wants people to be able to come through that border. I'm headed to Texas this weekend where we've seen thousands and thousands of unaccompanied children coming across the border because President Biden on his first day in office said if you're 17 years old and down, you can come into the country. Now, that was prohibited during the Trump administration. Now President Biden has said if you're 17 and younger, you can come in. And so what has happened is we have thousands of people that are 17 and down, most of them 15, 16, 17-year-old males that are coming across the border. There's no facilities to be able to handle them, and they're releasing them into the country.
When you say they release him, I understand they're putting him on buses and taking him as far as like Midland and Texas and all the way into the heartland of America, then dropping them out. I mean, how could we sustain something like that?
Yeah, it's a terrible practice. What's the way they're set up right now is if let's say a 17-year-old guy comes across the border, he has a phone number of an uncle who lives in Chicago. He'll say, here's where I want to stay. They'll contact his uncle, do a background check on him. They don't verify whether they're also legally present in the country or not. And then they'll actually take them to Chicago and drop them off there. If they're an adult, 18 and older, they don't have any place to hold them anymore. So they're just releasing them into the towns that are nearby and saying, show up for a court hearing in some future date. Or for the first time ever, the Biden team is saying we don't have time to be able to pick a court date for you will contact you later to be able to get you a court date, and they're just releasing them into the country with no way to actually be able to contact them. So these are people literally crossing the border illegally as adults that are being released into the country, or that are 17 years old that they're actually transitioning to another relative that's in the country also illegally and saying show up for a court hearing 2 years from now, which obviously most of those folks don't show up for the hearings.
That's a horrible situation. Let me ask you something else. The Democratic agenda includes D.C. statehood. So if they give statehood to D.C., which it should take a majority of the votes to do it, but apparently they can do it with a simple majority, that gives them 2 more senators. Then they're talking about statehood for Puerto Rico, which is 2 more. They decide that that'll flip the balance almost permanently. What can you all do to stop that?
Yeah, we need to continue to be able to stand up and speak out on this issue. This is not about giving voting rights to people in Washington, D.C. This is about taking over the Senate, adding more Democratic senators into D.C. Washington, D.C. is 1/10 of the size of my hometown of Oklahoma City. 1/10 of the size. They're talking about making a state from a city. If the people of Washington, D.C. want to be able to have access to more voting rights, then Washington, D.C. can be absorbed into Maryland. The southern part of Washington, D.C. decades and decades ago was absorbed into Virginia. We can take the rest of Washington, D.C., absorb it into Maryland, and so those folks can have separate voting rights on it, but keep then the core of Washington, D.C. still the district. So we've changed the boundaries of the district before decades ago. That's perfectly fine, but creating an entirely new state out of the District of Columbia is inconsistent with the United States Constitution, and it just begs the definition of what a state really is. For something so tiny as a small city of Washington, D.C. to be defined as a state should not be what we do. So I have no problem with those folks actually getting a voting right, but they need to become part of Maryland as the southern part of D.C. became part of Virginia years ago. That's a better way to be able to do it.
Senator, I understand the North Koreans just launched a missile. They're going to test us. The Chinese are testing us in Taiwan. We're being tested right around the globe. Do you think the president is up to the task?
Well, we're about to find out on that. Our Secretary of State met with Chinese leadership in Alaska just last weekend, and the Chinese stepped up and just gave a tongue lashing to the United States, of which our Secretary of State did not stand up for a defense of who we are as Americans. And so clearly the Chinese are pressing on the United States to be able to back off and leave them alone while they are stripping houses of worship from their freedom. They're imprisoning Muslims in a section of China and putting them in concentration re-education camps, all kinds of human rights violations that are there, obviously stealing our intellectual property from us as a country, and they continue to be able to press against Hong Kong. The people of Hong Kong have lost their freedom entirely in just the last few months, and the last bastion of that was stripped away. So yes, China is definitely on the move. The United States needs to be able to step up to this and to be able to speak out forcefully for basic human rights and dignities for the Chinese people.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you as well. Good to talk to you again.
Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, a distinguished member of that body, and I hope there are many more like him in the Congress.